streaming live on YouTube as well. So I'll start again. So thanks for choosing to spend a sunny and some places windy evening with us for an information session focused on sustainable service delivery and SCRD wastewater treatment facilities. And my name is Aidan Buckley. I work as the Manager of Communications and Engagement with the Sunshine Coast Regional District. I want to start by acknowledging that the Sunshine Coast Regional District is located on the land of Seychelles and Squamish First Nations. So what's ahead of us this evening? We have a panel of SCRD staff who I'll introduce shortly, some great information about sustainable service delivery, and most importantly, lots of time for questions. Our session this evening is also available on YouTube. Just some housekeeping to start us off. There are 3 ways to ask a question on this virtual session. On the bottom of your screen, you'll see a little hand that you can click, and that'll raise it and let me know that you're looking to ask a question. You can ask your question directly to the panel. You can also type your question into the Q&A, and the chat function is also open on your screen. I'd ask that you try and use the Q&A as much as possible because it's the easiest way to keep track of questions that we're getting to. So I'm just going to start off by introducing our panel here and ask each of you just to give a little bit of a wave. And we're going to start off with Kyle Doyle, who is our Manager of Asset Management. We've Shane Walkie, who's our Manager of Utility Services, and Bobby Rebner, who's our Utility Business Coordinator, and then Remco Rosenboom, who's our General Manager of Infrastructure Services. And I think, Remco, if you can, kick us off here and just kind of give us a sense of what's led up to these sessions, it'd be much appreciated.
Thank you, Aidan. Thank you all for attending. The purpose of today's meeting is to have a conversation with the users of our wastewater treatment systems about the efforts we've been undertaking over the last several years regarding to get to a point where we can say that we have a better handle on our wastewater treatment systems. We've identified several years ago that the way the treatments were managed was not sustainable. So from a financial perspective, but also there were some other risks that we identified. So we're on a trajectory to get to a more sustainable service delivery. And over the years, in discussions with users of the wastewater treatment systems, we identified the need to have more conversations with the users directly. And that was supported by the board last year. So this is the first of several meetings that will be held this year regarding our wastewater systems. This one will primarily focus on what is the sustainable service delivery and how in general, and how does it apply to the wastewater treatment systems in particular. Friday morning at between 10 and noon, there will be a similar session in person at the SCRD office. And in October, there will be several meetings with the users of several systems combined around the rates, the proposed rates for 2023. And as will be clear from the conversation I think we are going to have today, rate setting is an important part of getting to a place where we can actually say we're managing these systems in a sustainable manner. So I think I'll leave it at that for the moment, Aidan. Over to you.
Perfect. Thanks, Remco. And I'm then going to throw it over to Kyle, who's going to get us started here on a presentation. Kyle's presentation is going to be in 2 parts, and there will be time for questions kind of halfway through. So feel free to start putting them in the chat or raise your hand. We'll make sure we get to them. And then obviously then, as I mentioned earlier, when Kyle's finished up, we got lots of time for further conversation. So I'll throw it over to you, Kyle.
Awesome. Thank you, Aidan. Just going to share my screen here. Just get the confirmation that you see the presentation on screen.
Yeah, we can see it. Thanks, Kyle.
All right. So again, thanks for coming this evening. For this presentation, we'll be talking a bit more generally about sustainable service delivery and how it relates to wastewater services. We won't be getting into any specifics of any particular wastewater service in this presentation, but in the later sessions, we'll be talking about those sort of things. Some of this might be a bit overly simplified, but the intention here is to make sure that we're helping everyone build some foundational understanding of what the SCRD is doing to ensure we can deliver services sustainably. So before we get into too deep into sustainable service delivery, I think it'd be a good idea to build a little bit of background and understand the foundation here about service delivery in regional districts. So what's on the screen now are some of the essential questions we need to be able to answer to understand sustainable service delivery. Interestingly, these basically the same questions that were the motivation for the creation of regional districts. As the rural areas began to receive more services, the management of those services was burdensome on small municipalities. And so in the 60s, it was decided something needed to be done about it. But I digress. To answer those questions, we'll start with services, and they are exactly what they sound like. The SCRD provides many services, but there is some of them that are probably the more familiar ones. More exist with less of a physical presence, such as planning and the building department. Services are typically established in response to a request or a petition from residents for that service. After a service is defined and the regional district receives a request to provide that service, a process is undertaken to ensure the majority of the proposed participants actually want that service, and that informs whether the service is created or not. For most of the services, almost all the services, they're delivered through or facilitated through assets, physical assets. And assets are the things that make it possible to have services. And we look at the screen here and we're talking about the water service. You know, there's many assets related to the water service that we don't see in our day-to-day life, but we all use water day to day. There are hundreds of kilometers of underground water mains. We have reservoirs, dams, treatment plants, complicated processes inside those. And the SCRD is responsible for managing and maintaining all those assets. So from everything from wells to fire hydrants and everything in between. So this is true for all the services, basically. They're essential assets that allow us to deliver the service. We can break those assets down from big things like ice rinks into the smaller components like the doors and the windows, the dasher, the machine that makes the ice. You know, for transit, you can talk about bus stops. So all these assets help provide services. From bridges in our parks to the fire trucks and SCBA equipment that save lives, these assets are owned and managed by the SCRD in order to make these services possible. And we all know these assets deteriorate over time, and they will need to be replaced at some point. And to make sure that we can still provide that service, we need to be able to afford those costs. And that's true as much for wastewater as every other service. These assets require an ongoing investment to make sure we're able to realize the maximum benefit. So there's beyond just the replacement cost we have to consider, there is a operations and maintenance cost to make sure we do the adequate amount, the optimal amount of maintenance to maximize the lifespan of these assets. So when we think about wastewater services, that includes activities such as repairing leaks in the mains, repairing minor components in our treatment services, pumping out the sludge from the facility when the tanks are near full, making sure that the discharge, verification of the discharge parameters to make sure we're within our permit requirements, and more. So all these costs add up quite quickly. And the next question naturally is, who pays for this? So here's a significant departure between municipalities and regional districts. Municipalities can tax the whole for all the services they provide. In rural areas with regional districts, we have variable distribution of services. Some properties may not have water service. Many don't have wastewater services. There's different fire departments that service different regions. Sunshine Coast Regional District is a huge area. It extends all the way up to Whistler, almost borders on Squamish. It's a very difficult area to provide services equally across the entire area. And so some services we deliver are regional services such as parks, recreation, and transit. And it's more subjective to determine who pays for these than a much more simple service like wastewater. Unfortunately, today we're talking about wastewater, so we can dive into what we call local area services. Local services. So local services have clearly defined service areas called local service areas. On the map in front of you here is the primary wastewater services in the Sunshine Coast, and you can see they're spread out across the whole SCRD. Local service areas have defined boundaries, and the properties within those boundaries are considered to be participating properties or service area participants. So the costs we discussed earlier, which are incurred in the delivery of the service, are only allowed to be recovered from the service participants. At the SCRD, we typically collect two streams of revenue for our services. We collect frontage fees from all participating properties within the service area. And the purpose of these are to fund the replacement of assets as they deteriorate. With wastewater services, as there are relatively few very expensive assets with relatively long extended lifespans, the frontage fees are typically contributed to a capital reserve to allow us to build up towards the next purchase as we move towards it. User fees are typically collected from all properties that are using the service and are allocated to fund the maintenance and operation costs of the service. Staff in the service maintain and repairing the assets. A reserve is also maintained for operation costs because we're not allowed to borrow to do operational activities. So we have to make sure that if unexpected costs come up, we're able to fund that. It's important to note that the reserves that I speak of in both those situations are specific to the service and you can't be shared outside that service either. So at this point, we should all have a little bit better understanding when we're talking about services, assets in the context of a regional district, and who ends up paying for these services. And I'm going to open it up for questions and stop sharing the screen for a second.
Thanks, Kyle. Yeah, so if anybody has a question at this point, feel free to raise your hand, or else at the bottom of your screen there, you've got a Q&A tab that you can click on and click on a question. And you can also put it into comments there if you'd like. And maybe Kyle, Shane, I don't know if you may be able to help us out with this one. These are a couple of questions that we've had come in around this topic in the past, and that I'll refer to. Within wastewater treatment plants themselves, what kind of assets are we talking about within the treatment plants?
Thanks, Aidan. I'll take this one. It depends on which treatment plant you're part of, but there are a lot of similar things like a collection system, all the piping that's in the ground, collecting all the sewage, manholes. People see the manhole covers, but there's actually something underneath there. There's a big hole that connects it to the pipes that take the effluent down to the plants. And depending on which plant you're at, so Square Bay, for example, has a large concrete treatment plant, and inside of it, there's large blowers that blows air into the process. There's a UV system in there, ultraviolet, to deal with the bacteria. There's a process tank up top, and something as important as a generator. So there's lots of various assets at each wastewater plant.
And maybe building on that, Shane, across the coast, we've 15 of these facilities. How do they differ in size? So, and kind of, I guess, volume of waste that they're dealing with?
Yeah, so there is quite a range actually. Like, so for, if you live at Sunnyside, it's basically a collection system, a septic tank, and a septic field, where places like Square Bay or Lee Bay, they produce up to 170, 135 cubic meters in that range. And they're quite a large volume because they have something like 178 users, or could be users up in Lee Bay. So Greaves Road is another example where there's only 6 houses on that septic field that we maintain. So it's a large range, and of course, different assets at each place.
Shane, we've had a question here from C. Alexander. Thanks for asking and for attending this evening. And they're saying user fees and frontage fees. Why are the costs divided this way? Is that dictated by the province, or is that a policy decision by SCRD or staff?
Kyle, would you be able to answer that one?
Yeah, for sure. So, a large reason we chose to divide the cost that way is for transparency and accountability. It allows us to see to separate the two streams, and you can see where your money's going. The other reason is by separating them, you have different reserve balances for each. And so you're never, tempted to take away from a reserve that you're intending to spend on future projects to pay for repairs or something like that, or vice versa. So it's just a simplification. And
go ahead, Remco.
I think to add to that, I think it's also, and to answer the specific question, It's an SCRD policy. However, it is more or less common amongst all regional districts and local governments to manage it this way. What it allows for is the frontage fees are paid for everybody that can connect to a system. So even if the lot is empty, you're still paying frontage fees, and that ties back to the question that you're able to make use of the service. So the asset, you're having a benefit of the fact that the asset is there and that you can use that service if desired. The frontage fees, the user fees are really for those who are actually using the fee. So those are paying for day-to-day operations and maintenance of the system. So that's why there's also a benefit between of splitting them. One is paid for by all potential users, and the other one is paid for by the actual users of the system.
Perfect. Thanks, Remco. Kyle, I don't know if you want to tee up part 2 here, and we can continue on. And as I said, if anybody does have a question, just while Kyle's getting ready there, if you can put it into the Q&A down the bottom, and on comments, or else put up your hand here. Far away there, Kyle.
All right, thank you. So back onto the track of sustainable service delivery. The SCRD is seeking, like Remco said, to deliver services sustainably. Sustainability encompasses considerations for social, environmental, and economic factors. So I guess, logically, the first question is what is sustainability? And if we go to the dictionary, we can see that sustainability, from the root word sustained, is the ability to be maintained at a certain rate or level. The BC government has a definition of sustainability that is a little bit more specific in the context of service delivery. And they define sustainability: a sustainable community effectively balances economic, social, cultural, and environmental interests in order to meet the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. And so when we're talking about sustainability, this part's pretty important to make sure we consider. And we're talking about the ability to maintain the services we provide, balance those 3 main considerations, and ensure that we don't compromise the ability of future generations to meet their needs. So into those 3 main considerations, economic sustainability focuses on the consideration of the cost of the service, and fundamentally the goal is to establish the lowest cost that can be sustained for the life of the service. Understanding the large future expenses, ensuring that these costs do not result in prohibitive increases to the cost of the service, is a key principle of our economic sustainability. The SCRD, especially with wastewater services and many other services, are working to develop capital plans that consider the revenue for each of the services and project their future costs. We're going to get into more detail about these capital plans at the later sessions, not tonight. But today I wanted to highlight that these plans allow us to consider the future financial outlook for each service, and hopefully avoid situations where the sudden realization of a large costs will drive the cost to deliver that service to untenable levels, remembering that these services are shared among the few participants that are in them. So a large obstacle for us in determining economic sustainability has been that this is something that we're considering, and it's kind of a new awareness focus area, and we never previously focused on the long term for too far into the future. So we're observing some significant gaps between what has been done and maybe the best practices. Environmental sustainability. It's the idea that when we provide a service, we're trying to mitigate the impact we have on the natural environment. And so for wastewater services, we can think about ensuring the treatment of the wastewater is effective, and that what we're discharging into the natural environment isn't impacting the health of the ecosystem. We can look for efficiencies in our processes, so the energy that we use to treat wastewater is minimized. And that includes looking at new technology. And the other aspect is ensuring that we maximize the lifespan of each component in our wastewater services through good maintenance. A lot of the greenhouse gas emissions and that sort of thing are in the production of some of the construction materials, pouring concrete, that sort of thing. Digging up the road to replace and repaving it to replace pipe has side costs and side impacts on the environment. So for SCRD wastewater services, and especially those that discharge and are situated near the ocean or other sensitive ecosystems, I think that, the environmental sustainability becomes driven a lot by external agencies that have requirements become more stringent over time. And I think we can anticipate that the expectations of our discharge and our impact on the environment will become something that's more reviewed over time. The third aspect of sustainability is social sustainability. And this is about concepts that will enable our society to thrive and grow. And the SCRD, we seek to align with these values where possible. Now, these aren't always super applicable in a service like wastewater, where you get a pretty basic service, and we're not talking about as much in the equity and diversity, but I think it's important as an organization that we consider these factors in our decisions and in the delivery of our service, and we don't compromise on these values. So as we near the end of the presentation, we can ask the question, how do we get to sustainability? How do we achieve it? The SCRD is making strides towards sustainability, and we know that the path to sustainability has a pretty clear roadmap. We need to achieve some things to get there. We need effective planning, and we're working hard to do that. This means knowing what we own, where it is, why it's important. This means knowing what we do and what we've done that works and what doesn't. It means understanding the finances of every service that we deliver. And finally, it means that we communicate clearly the destination that we're trying to get to so that everyone involved knows what we're looking to achieve and can work together. We're looking to understand the service goals and needs. Again, with wastewater, it's maybe not as applicable. We're looking for a clean service that doesn't impact the environment. But with some of the other services, it's important that we have a lot of engagement and understand what expectations are from the community for their services. We're looking to have purposeful action. And this means that once we know where we're going, we need to make sure we take actions to get there, and make sure that the actions don't hamper our progress in the future. Like we said earlier, the best solution is not always the fastest or cheapest. Well thought out actions are essential to sustainability. And finally, and maybe most importantly, we need to work to improve on an ongoing basis. And then we are doing that. We're seeking feedback, and we're looking and reviewing our progress. We're going to look to report our performance clearly. I think through this level of transparency and accountability, we can achieve sustainable service delivery. Oh, missed that little click there. So sustainability of service is the drive and purpose of asset management. And what's on the screen there is the roadmap to sustainable service delivery. This is published by the Asset Management BC. And you can see at the core is sustainable service delivery. So appreciating that this is an evolving, continuous process, we're looking for every opportunity to improve the sustainability of services here at the SCRD. And that's what asset management's looking to help achieve. So that's the end of my discussion at this point. Just want to raise your attention to what's next. As Aidan said, there's some in-person availability this Friday from 10 a.m. to noon at Field Road. Later in October, there's service-specific information sessions that will be hosted. There should be mail outs coming to your door soon about that. And if you don't see it there, please check the Let's Talk pages for more information. The website's there on the screen. You can just go to letstalk.scrd.ca and click through to it quite easily as well. So thank you for your time today. I'm going to close this off and open up to questions again.
Thanks, Kyle. Just to add a little bit to what Kyle was saying, on the Let's Talk platform, you can also ask questions about your individual service. So when you go onto that main page, there, letstalk.scrd.ca/wastewater, each facility has its own page, and staff are monitoring those pages. So if you ask a question, we will get back to you if you have any specific ones. We've a couple of questions that have come in so far. The first, I believe, is maybe Jay Tufford, is asking, if you pay a frontage fee, become a user, why do you continue to pay a frontage fee? I don't know who wants to take that.
So Bobby, do you want to take that one on? I see you're typing here, but do you want to talk to the audience, Bobby, about that question?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. And thanks for the question. So Kyle mentioned it earlier in the presentation, how frontage fees are set and user fees are set. And frontage fees, the revenue from that stream go towards funding essentially the asset replacements and everything to do on the capital side of the service area. So although you may at one point in time have had a vacant lot and then have built on it, it doesn't change the fact that assets perpetually age and require replacement. So that revenue stream is essentially always required to ensure that, as Kyle mentioned, reserves get built and future funding is in place to address assets as they as needed, as they require replacement.
Perfect. Thanks, Bobby. So we have another question here from C. Alexander again. Thanks for your question. And they're asking, in environmental sustainability context, you've alluded that regulations will get more stringent, e.g. regarding discharge. How stringent are we already? Are we just meeting requirements, or are we overachieving environmentally? I don't know who wants to take that one.
I'll start on it, Aidan.
Thanks, Shane.
Certainly in the past, the regulators weren't as enforcing the regulations. And so if you were to go over your flows one day, it wasn't that big of a deal 10, 15 years ago. Well, now we have to report it. So we have to report it within 24 hours. So if we have a plant that if it's supposed to be 10 cubic meters a day and we go to 11 for some reason, we have to report it. We have to do a follow-up report, a 30-day report as to what we're doing about it. Also in the past, treatment plants are based off of biological oxygen demand, which is called BOD, and total suspended solids. In the past, the lower the number, the better. And in the past, it was 60 and 60 BOD and TSS. And the regional district, when we're building new plants and trying to upgrade plants, we go to 10-10. Even though our permits might say 45-45, specifically the Half Moon Bay Liquid Waste Management Plant, so the plants in that area want to get 10-10 effluent quality. So the effluent quality has increased. That's our goal quite a bit. It's from the past, and also the regulation and the regulators are enforcing their requirements much more strictly now than in the past.
Maybe I can add a little bit to the changing regulatory framework we're operating within. As Aidan indicated, or as Shane indicated, regulators, Ministry of Environment in particular, are focusing more on the enforcement of the regulations that they were doing in the past. And that's actually one of the drivers for us to get to this level, to increase our sustainable service delivery. Because we know that a system that is not well maintained or not well, or where infrastructure is not functioning as it should, it's just ultimately, most likely, it will create in some kind of non-compliance with the regulation. It can be or nuisance to the neighborhood, odor, effluent quality that is not up to par, leakage into the environment. So a recent example is a very unfortunate one, but I'm going to share it. Our Roberts Creek co-housing wastewater treatment plant, we've been working on that for the last 3-4 years because we recognized that it was in non-compliance with some of the regulations, in part because of inadequate design of the plant, and in part because it was the maintenance could have been better for several years prior to us really spending a lot of time and energy in it last several years. However, at the same time, the Ministry of Environment also started to pay attention to the fact that we're not always in compliance at the plant. So even though we spent tens of thousands of dollars on upgrading the plant ultimately, and we're almost to a situation that we're meeting all the regulatory requirements, still the Ministry of Environment recently issued us a $9,000 fine. And unfortunately, as indicated by cow how our services work, any costs associated with the plant are to be borne by the users of the plant. So in this case, the users of the Robbins Creek housing community will need to fund that fine, and we were in good conversation with them on how to do that. But it is a good example of where 5 or 10 years ago something would have not resulted in a fine like this. Currently, MOE is way more strict. So as a result, we have to up our game as well, and we're doing that. So I think that's a good example of why sustainable service delivery is not only important for us as SCRD for the users, but ultimately it's on our benefit.
Thanks, Remco. Thanks, Shane. I hope that answers your question okay. So again, if you do have a question, you can put it into the Q&A at the bottom of the screen, or else feel free to raise your hand and you can ask it yourself. I don't know, maybe Remco or Shane or Kyle, you might be able to help out, and Bobby as well. You know, we may have some people here in the audience who may not have a good sense of the history of the wastewater treatment facilities and kind of how, you know, the SCRD has become to operate them. And I'm not too sure if any of you may be able to give us a quick, 2-minute spin down memory lane and give us a sense of the history maybe of some of these facilities. Yeah, I don't know who may want to take this. Just thinking if we've got some people here who may not be aware of
it. Shane,
I'll start and you guys can finish up. So using Lee Bay for an example, Lee Bay was just a forest, I guess, and I remember the fish farm out there, and phase 1 went through, and that was just the lower part by the treatment plant there. And then multiple phases, I think there was 4 or 5 phases as it grew out to a large plant. And for some time now in the SCRD bylaws, it was that the SCRD would get involved in the larger plants, the ones that are the Ministry of Environment, which are over 22.7 cubic meters a day. So there's an example of a plant that has been around for a while and grown up in phases. Another one is the Langdale wastewater plant that's been there a long time, and we're looking at we've applied for a grant to hopefully replace that plant in the coming year or two. Other plants sort of grew up with the neighborhoods, I think, like Greaves Road and Canoe. They've been there a long time, and we recently in the last few years upgraded both of those plants. And Bobby, would you want to talk about the upgrades there that we did not long ago, and the funding as well?
Sure. Which facilities did you say?
Yeah.
Canoe
and Merrill.
Yeah, absolutely. So back in, I believe it was 2019, I could be off by a year or so, 2019, 2020, due to a number of different reasons, one being the age of certain assets of those facilities, another being what some of our technical operators have noticed. We identified that the septic fields at both facilities were either in poor condition or were at risk of potentially having breakouts in the fields. So we applied for an intake of provincial and federal grant funding. Were successful in our application, and then worked with local engineers and contractors to replace both fields. In the case of Merrill, it was a field and a dosing tank and distribution boxes. And in the case of Canoe Road, it was essentially a replacement of the field with a more modern solution that uses coconut husks as a filtration method and allows for the essentially the treatment of liquid waste in a very small area. And both projects were completed, I think, in the beginning of 2020, and were quite successful.
Good stuff. Thank you for that. So Brian, here's just at how many people are watching the presentation. And we got 9 attendees right now, Brian. We've a couple, I believe, watching YouTube as well. And there's no way that I can break that down by any particular wastewater facility. As Kyle mentioned earlier, we have another session coming up on Friday, and then we will be doing specific sessions to each individual wastewater treatment facility closer to the end of October. And we'll be providing mail outs to residences for those just to make them all aware of it. And just a question here, Bobby, you were mentioning just about, some of the more recent work, and I guess kind of looking ahead as well into the future here. How much are material costs affecting sustainable service delivery? I don't know if there's anybody on the call who's been recently doing a renovation or anything like that, but we do know they have gone up. So just wondering if anybody can speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone, both in the community and in the world, is pretty aware of what's been happening in global markets in terms of inflationary pressures and cost of goods. The Sunshine Coast is not immune to that. And I think a good argument can be made that historically, Sunshine Coast even sees higher costs than the Lower Mainland. So, I mean, one example that's relevant to wastewater is in 2020, I believe, the District of Sechelt raised their dumping rates for liquid waste up at the Dusty Road dump site by about 210%. A lot of the inputs that we require for both wastewater and water have consistently gone up, including chemicals, electricity, and so forth. So, it's kind of an annual and almost daily struggle for us as staff and technical operators to try to manage these cost increases while trying to keep things affordable for the users. And yeah, I mean, no doubt it's a challenge for everyone here.
Great answer. Thanks. Thanks for that one, Bobby. So would we see there that that's some of the kind of biggest challenges that we're going to foresee in the coming years with these wastewater treatment facilities? I'm not sure if there's anything you can chime in on, Kyle. Is there anything else in particular that we're going to be seeing?
We have a fair number of wastewater systems that were built in the 80s and late 70s, and they're approaching the end of life. And so the challenge is making sure that we, as far ahead as possible, plan for that, and we're prepared. And that's what we're working to do. So I see that as one of the bigger challenges that we're facing across the services. The costs are, it's hard to say what the short-term, acute inflationary pressures that Bobby was talking about is going to impact the long-term capital costs. Often we see a depressionary trend after a big spike of inflation. But yeah, I'm not that guy. I can't make any promises.
Another thing I would like to raise is that in the past, we just presented that service user fees are paying for operations, or frontage fees are paying for the asset replacement, infrastructure replacement, and renewals. However, for several of the plants, there has been mixing of funds over the years to keep the user fees and the frontage fees low. However, what we're seeing in order to get to sustainable funding, that's not longer sustainable. And what we've seen as a result is that some of the systems, the user fees are not sufficient. The collected amount of user fees are not sufficient to fund the current operating cost. So in February last year, this year, February 2020, we presented the report to the board and listed the systems where there is underfunding of the operating expenditures by the user fees. So if anybody wants to see that report, it's on our website. It was in February at the Community Services Committee meeting. So moving forward this fall, and the board would need to will need to consider what to do with those systems, because they are underfunded, and the reserves, our saving accounts for those systems are sometimes also already depleted. So that will be a big challenge moving forward for those systems on how to get them back into a sustainable service delivery, while not significantly increasing the user fees for the users itself. And it has to be seen to what extent that's actually possible.
Thanks, Remco. And Kyle beat me to it. He managed to get that report into the chat.
Oh, that's
triggered on me.
That's just a host one.
Thank you for that. Brian has asked a question here. I'm not too sure if we have this at hand or not. Just asking about the systems that are underfunded at this time. I don't know if anybody's available to answer that for us. Go ahead, Remco.
I can do that. Give me 1 sec. The underfunded systems are Square Bay, Jolly Roger, Secret Cove, Greaves, Lady Lake, Saginaw Ridge, Roberts Creek, Co-housing, and Wood Creek Park and Langdale. So quite a number, given that we're operating 15. I think I'm counting 8 here.
So one other question here, and just so everybody knows, on the Let's Talk pages themselves, we are, adding to them and the individual pages for each individual wastewater treatment facility. And, we've got reports on there. We're going to look at adding financials as well and in the coming months. And just, if there are people here on the call who may be new to wastewater treatment facilities, I guess, what can they do to help maintain these facilities? I don't know if we've any advice for anyone who may be attending or maybe watching us here on YouTube or maybe watching us after the meeting at some point, when we distribute this via social media on YouTube.
It sounds really obvious, Aiden, but don't flush chocolate bar wrappers down the toilet. Don't dump grease down your sink. We have Merrill Crescent has in the past, and I also know Wood Creek Park in the past. They look like icebergs. They're big chunks of grease, and they just block up the tanks. They just take volume away. They make it less efficient to treat. I've also seen like dog kibble getting dumped down in bowlfuls or something. So don't dump things down your toilet. It's not a garbage can, it's a toilet. Please.
There you go. So again, if we got any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A here. And we got another one from Brian. He says, thanks for the prompt reply. No problem. Next question. He's asking, what's the average percentage increase for those underfunded systems? And again, I don't know if we have that info at hand yet. Okay, Remco.
I'm going to take that one. I would suggest read the report, and because that's part of the analysis that we have to do between now and October, and that will be presented as part of our rate proposals for next year. So how that works is we'll do a proposal, we'll present it to the community late October, and then in November we're going to present to the board for their approval. And so we're still working through the process. What are the options? And so that is to be determined. But the actual amount and significance of the underfunded services, that's included in the report. That's listed in the chat box. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Remco. So any more Q&As, feel free to put them on there. Brian says, thanks, no problem at all. Brian, feel free to put them on in there or else into the comments or raise your hand if you need to. I guess maybe just one more question, and then, as I said, if we're not seeing a whole lot of questions come in, we may wrap it up here shortly. Remco, you mentioned Ministry of Environment. What other oversight do we have on these on treatment facilities on the coast? Is it just Ministry of Environment, or do we have other folks who are keeping an eye on them?
I think we have our treatment plants are regulated by or Ministry of Environment, and their official name, by the way, is Ministry of Environment and Climate Change Strategy, or Vancouver Coastal Health. So it depends on the magnitude and size of the system, and the size of the system is really dependent on is measured by the amount of flow that is being treated per day, that is possible to be treated per day per system. So the largest systems are regulated under provincial regulation by the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change Strategies, and the other ones are regulated also under provincial regulation, but then by Vancouver Coastal Health. And we have systems that are currently MOE, and we have currently systems that are within Vancouver Coastal Health.
Great stuff. Thanks, Remco. So we're going to look to start winding this down now. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A or else raise a hand, or else put it into comments. And Remco, I'm going to call on you in a sec, just I guess to give us a sense of what from a process perspective, what's next. You were saying, about, bringing some things to board in November, and I'll just chat briefly about, what's next from an information standpoint. So, this coming Friday, you can show up at the SCRD, the Field Road office, anytime between 10 and 12. Some of the folks you're seeing here on the panel will be available to answer any questions. Colin may do a bit of a run through of the presentation, which he's already provided earlier today. Following that, we'll be sending letters to residents who are in wastewater facilities, and essentially letting you know about specific information sessions which are going to be more specific towards your facility, which will be taking place closer to the end of October. And again, there's a great opportunity to learn more about the facilities and ask questions then. And between now and then, you can log on to letstalk.scrd.ca/wastewater. And when Remco's talking, I'll put it in the chat because I'm not great at doing two things at once. And I'll put the link to the Let's Talk page in the chat here shortly. And on there, you can find each individual wastewater treatment facility has its own page where you can go ahead and ask questions. Those questions come directly through to staff, and we can provide answers for them. And we also make those answers public just if other people are coming on who may have an interest. So that's the next steps for us from an information standpoint. And hearing from you, and Remco, I'll just send it over to you then, just to give us a sense of what's next around rates. And yeah.
Okay, thank you. So, as indicated before, there are this fall the board will most likely towards the end of November, the board, SCRD board, will make decisions on what the user fees and frontage fees will be for each of the systems in 2023. At least for 2023. So for some of these systems, the current board already made some decisions, but we'll revise them, review them, and see if further amendments are proposed by staff. So Kyle, Bobby, Shane, and myself, we're currently working on the analysis to support those rates. In October, we'll present the rates to the users of the systems at several public meetings. They will be virtual. They will be posted online. Residents will get a letter on when those meetings will be held. Any feedback or questions received at those meetings will be considered in our proposals to the board that will be presented to the board in November. In November, the board will hopefully will decide on what the rates will be for next year. And then we have to do the formal step of incorporating those new rates in our bylaws, and that will then take place early December so that they're in place and that everybody, all the users know what they have to pay in 2023 by the end of the year. And then they will be in effect as of January 1st next year.
Great stuff. Thanks so much, Remco. We're going to wind it down now. Thank you, everybody who's attended. This session is going to be available on YouTube, so feel free to share it with folks who may not have had an opportunity to come along this evening. I want to thank Kyle, Remco, Bobby, and Shane for your time this evening, and we'll see all of you either on Friday or else hopefully towards the end of October. So thank you, everybody.